That night, the rain poured heavily, pounding on the roof of my old, creaking house. I sat alone in the living room, accompanied only by the sound of thunder that occasionally echoed through the night sky. The lights around the village had gone out hours ago, leaving my home illuminated only by the weak and flickering glow of a candle on the wooden table. Something felt wrong that night. The air was colder than usual, chilling me to the bone, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Although I was used to silence, tonight the silence felt different. It felt as if something was lurking in the darkness, waiting. That was when I heard the sound of footsteps, faintly audible from above. My heart instantly began to race. I knew the house was supposed to be empty. I was the only one here. But the sound of those footsteps was real. Slowly, the footsteps grew closer, as if someone was walking across the old wooden floor toward the stairs. I held my breath, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then, the footsteps stopped, right above my head in the attic, which I hadn't entered in years. With trembling hands, I grabbed a flashlight from the table and summoned the courage to go upstairs. Every step I took made the floorboards creak loudly in the oppressive silence. In front of the attic door, I hesitated. My heart pounded, and cold sweat trickled down my temple. The attic door looked older and more weathered than I remembered. With a deep breath, I turned the rusted doorknob and pushed it open slowly. The door creaked ominously, and darkness greeted me on the other side. As my flashlight beam cut through the shadows, I saw nothing. The room was empty, filled only with dust and cobwebs. But before I could feel relieved, my flashlight suddenly went out. Total darkness. I tried to turn it back on, but it wouldn't work. That's when I heard the sound of breathing heavy and rough coming from the corner of the room. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept past me, sending chills down my spine. There was something there, I could feel it. Something watching me from the darkness. And then, I heard the whisper. Faint, almost inaudible, but clear enough to freeze my blood. Get out of here. Without thinking twice, I ran down the stairs, the attic door slamming shut behind me. In the living room, the candle that had been burning suddenly went out, plunging the house into total darkness. I stood still, trembling with fear, and then I noticed something even more terrifying. There was a shadow in the corner of the room, moving, even though there was no light to cast it. Slowly, the shadow moved closer, and I could see its form, tall, thin, with glowing red eyes. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The figure kept advancing, and just before everything went black, I heard the whisper again, louder and more terrifying. You should never have returned. I jolted awake, gasping for breath, my body drenched in cold sweat. I glanced around, trying to find that shadowy figure, but there was nothing. Only silence hung in the heavy night air. I sat in the same living room. Everything looked exactly as it had before, but something felt off, as if time had stopped for a moment. The candle on the table was still burning, its small flame flickering, as though it had never gone out. With my heart still pounding, I tried to calm myself. Just a nightmare, I whispered to myself, trying to convince myself that none of it was real. But the fear felt too real, too deep to be just a dream. I got up from the sofa and walked toward the kitchen to get some water. As my feet touched the cold kitchen floor, I felt something strange, like a presence around me that I couldn't see. My steps halted in the middle of the room, and I felt a cold draft brush against the back of my neck, even though all the windows were tightly shut. I got up from the sofa and walked toward the kitchen to get some water. As my feet touched the cold kitchen floor, I felt something strange, like a presence around me that I couldn't see. My steps halted in the middle of the room, and I felt a cold draft brush against the back of my neck, even though all the windows were tightly shut. The voice returned, this time clearer. "You shouldn't be here." My body froze. The voice was so close, whispering in my ear, as if it came from the darkness behind me. I didn't dare turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed that whatever was behind me wasn't something human could face. My hands shook, and the glass I held slipped and shattered on the floor. Without thinking, I ran out of the kitchen toward the front door. I grasped the doorknob desperately, but it wouldn't open locked. I distinctly remembered not locking it. I pulled it with all my strength, but the door wouldn't budge. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. My heart stopped. I could feel the presence right behind me. A heavy breath brushed against my neck, freezing me in place. I knew if I turned around, I would see that horrifying figure with glowing red eyes in the darkness. I couldn't move, trapped in paralyzing fear. Then suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The darkness around me felt thicker, heavier, as if time had stopped again. I held my breath, hoping whatever it was had gone. But then, a hand cold and rough gripped my shoulder from behind. I screamed, my whole body trembling. I tried to fight back, to free myself, but the grip tightened. Slowly, the hand pulled me, forcing me to turn and face the darkness. Trembling, I turned, and standing before me was the figure. Tall, thin, with pale, almost translucent skin. Its red eyes gleamed, staring straight into mine. Its face was so close, I could feel its icy breath. "This isn't your home anymore," it rasped in a voice so guttural it made my stomach turn. I tried to step back, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure came closer, and I could feel its presence, so real, so suffocating, as if it was part of the darkness itself. Then, with a swift movement, the figure lunged at me, passing through my body like mist. The world around me changed. In an instant, I was no longer in my home. I stood in a vast, grim room filled with shifting shadows. The walls were covered in strange markings, and the air was thick with whispers from nowhere. I didn't know where I was, but one thing was certain: this wasn't the world I belonged to. And I wasn't alone. Dark figures began to emerge from the corners of the room, slowly approaching me. They whispered my name, their voices deadly, as I stood there, paralyzed with fear. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost in terror. Trapped between worlds and nightmares, I realized one thing. I had disturbed something I never should have, and now they would never let me go. The figures drew closer, their whispers growing louder, and each step they took seemed to drain the life from my body. My heart pounded, but I couldn't move. I tried to scream, to beg for help, but my voice vanished into the air, swallowed by the darkness that surrounded me. I felt a cold hand touch my arm, a pale hand emerging from the shadows and gripping my wrist tightly. The hand pulled me slowly, dragging me deeper into that grim room. Around me, other shadows reached for me, grasping, pulling me further into the darkness. I struggled, trying to fight back, but it was futile. They were too strong. My vision blurred, my body weakened. I knew that if I let them drag me further, I would never return. I would become part of this darkness, trapped forever between the world and an unending nightmare. With the last bit of strength, I screamed as loud as I could. The sound echoed, but it didn't drive them away. Instead, they came closer, chuckling softly, mocking my cries. I could feel something inside me breaking, as if my entire existence was being pulled apart. And then, everything stopped. I woke up on the floor of my living room, my body weak and limp. Morning light streamed through the window, warming my sweat-soaked skin. The house was back to normal, quiet and empty, as if everything that happened had been just a bad dream. But I knew it wasn't just a dream. The soft whisper still echoed in my ears. I stood shakily, trying to process what had just happened. When I glanced at the mirror in the corner of the room, I saw something that made my heart stop. In the mirror's reflection, standing right behind me, was the figure, tall, thin, with glowing red eyes. I gasped and spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, standing silently behind me, staring at me with piercing eyes. Then, it whispered, softer than before, but full of menace, "You'll never be free." I realized something terrifying. I might have escaped the darkness for now, but I hadn't truly returned. They had taken me, and a part of me was still trapped there. And they would always be watching me, waiting for the right moment to pull me back. And when that moment came, I knew I would never escape.